Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call the Special Finance and Audit Committee meeting to order. I'd first like to recognize that we are gathered on the traditional territory, the Sinimik First Nation. Our clerk today will be Ms. Shilaguri. The question period sign-up sheet is on the partition wall near the gallery. If during the meeting any member in the gallery has a question regarding an agenda item, would they please write down their name and agenda item on the sheet. And at the start of question period, I'll call those up who are signed up, and they can address the council at that time. The first item on the agenda is the item on the late items, and we have none, Ms. Guri.
No late items, Your Worship. No late items, Your Worship. Late CAO. He is on his way.
I understand there has been inclement weather, and Mr. Rudolph has been attempting his best to get across the Taylor Sea, but he'll get here. Unlike the mice and cat, we will not be playing. We will be working. Three, a motion for the adoption and approval of the agenda. Councillor Thorpe, seconded Councillor Bonner. All those in favour? Motion carried. A motion for the adoption of the minutes. None. And presentations. It's budget recap. Ms. Mercer. Back to the bottom line.
Thank you, Your Worship. So what I'll do is I will give a brief recap of where we left off last Monday, and I'll go through each of the decisions that was made quite quickly, and then the committee can continue their discussions on what they want to make changes to. So we started on Monday at 5.6%. And that represented 4.6% for general property increase and 1% for asset management. And after several changes were made by the committee, we are now down to 5.1, which is 4.1 for general taxation increases and 1% for asset management. And that gives us a total of 5.1%. We have, just a note, we have received all of our increases for extended health benefits and pension. And we have a very, very preliminary number for growth, and it's looking like growth will cover the increases to the benefits, so there will be a wash there. So we haven't included that in here, but they will likely offset one another. So the growth number, like I said, is very preliminary. We get the final preliminary number probably next week, but we won't get the final till March 2020. So and it hasn't changed enough for us to warrant a change to the budget. So just a recap of the changes that were made last Monday. So we as staff increased a revenue estimate, so that brought the taxes down 0.08. There was a decision to cap the strategic infrastructure reserve, so that brought it down 0.38. We had a funding increase for EMR training for the fire department, and that was a 0.06% increase. The Nanaimo Victim Services operating grant was increased by $50,000, and that represented one additional staff person. The Nanaimo Area Land Trust operating grant was increased by $5,000, and there was a change to the Loudon Boathouse funding source from general to the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve. So all of those combined accumulated to a decrease of about 0.5, and so that brings us down to our 5.1 from the 5.6 we had originally projected. There were no changes to the user fees, so sewer has a 4% increase, water a 7.5%, and sanitation user fees are $171 per household per year. But like I said, none of those have changed since our last presentation. So the impact to a typical home in Nanaimo, so the impact now is $108 for property taxes, and down from $117 that we were projecting last week. So that's a difference of $9. There was no changes to the user fees, and so the total impact to a typical house in Nanaimo is approximately $157 increase a year. So I'll go through just a brief recap of each of the decisions that were made. So like I mentioned, the the strategic infrastructure reserve was capped at the 2019 levels. So what this will mean is a 0.38 decrease to the 2020 taxes. Their funding to add the Marie-Davidson Bike Park design to the 2020 project plan is funded from the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve, so there's no impact to taxes from that decision. Emergency medical responder, or EMR training, was added, and that in 2020, we have a $66,750 in addition to the budget, which equates into a tax increase of 0.06%. The Vancouver Island Symphony, there was a motion to increase the funding to $120,000 from their current just a little over $89,000, and that will be funded from the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve, so there is no impact to taxes from that decision. And then there will be future decisions based once we have some policy around one-off grants. Victim services, there was a motion to increase funding for an additional staff member, so that was $50,000, and that increased, turned into a tax increase of 0.05% for 2020. The Nanaimo Area Land Trust, there was a motion to increase their annual grant from $30,000 to $35,000, so the additional $5,000 increase was very nominal to the budget. It was under 0.01%. There was a decision to hold off on the manager of sustainability until the community sustainability action plan was updated, and so there is no impact for that decision on taxes. We looked at all of the business cases that were included in the draft plan, and there was one change that was made, and that was a motion to approve the Loudon Boathouse design from the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve. So that was originally in the budget as funded from general capital. We've now changed it to be funded from the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve, and that resulted in a decrease to the taxes by 0.01 or 0.1%. And we finished off with business cases not included in the draft plan, and there was no decisions made on Monday regarding this to include anything, but there were discussions on the bylaw enforcement officer's change in schedule.
Councillor Hemmons.
Oh, no, it's Councillor Armstrong.
Sorry.
It's not me.
Yes. Councillor Thorpe saved the day again.
If we're going to be requesting motions on some of these not included in the draft plan, Your Worship, when would you like to have them? If we're going to be requesting a motion to maybe include something from one of the business cases not included in the draft plan, when would you like us to put them forward?
It would have to be a motion.
No, that's my question, but when would you like it done? At the end of the
Probably
presentation, or?
I think that's probably best.
Okay, thank you.
So, like I said, there was quite a bit of discussion around the bylaw enforcement officer change in schedule, which was a estimated increase of 0.05%. The project engineer, which is a 0.11% increase, and the deputy city clerk manager of legislative services, and that was a 0.13 increase. And you also discussed the idea of eliminating the council contingency budget line item, as the strategic infrastructure reserve could be used for the same purpose. And that would approximately reduce taxes by just a little under 0.1%. So that's where we left off. So it's up to the committee to decide where you want to go from here.
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would like to put a motion forward on the floor, and that is to increase the bylaw enforcement officer's change in schedule from 35 hours to 40 hours a week, for it to be partially funded from parking revenues, and the rest would be from taxation.
I'll second.
Seconded. Do you wish to speak to it?
Yes, I've spoken to it before, but I think with the issues that we're seeing downtown and other parts of the city and the rising crime, I think it's one way to help tackle the problem. Those extra 5 hours will make a difference for the bylaw, as we heard from Mr. LeBerge. It will make a difference for the downtown merchants. It can also be used for, because it would also, my understanding, the parking Would affect all bylaws, so parking would be out for 5 hours further. The municipal enforcement officers would also be out for 5 hours further, so I only see it as a benefit to the community. Thank you.
Anyone else? Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Ms. Mercer. So where it says 0.05% and then partially funded by parking revenues, is that 0.05 taxes plus the funding from parking revenues, or is it minus?
Through your worship to Councillor Turley, the 0.05 is just the tax portion. The parking portion has already been taken into the parking operations.
It's plus. Thank you.
Anything further? No further discussion? All those in favor? Contrary? None? Motion carries. Any further motions arising out of the report? Councillor Brown, please.
Yes. We're creeping up there, and I'd like to bring us back down. But I have a question through you to staff, if that's okay. The EMR, would it be possible to fund the first year out of that, out of the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve?
Through your worship to Councillor Brown, it is possible. However, it is an operating cost that will eventually be an ongoing cost and incorporated into their budget. We don't recommend that operating costs are funded. Regular operating costs are funded from reserves, but council has that option to do that. It wouldn't be something we would recommend, but you have that option.
And I guess the reason I'm thinking that, just for council's clarity, is it's about 0.06. And although money is going into that reserve, essentially it would just be a slightly longer phase of the delay from the funding of that reserve out of the casino revenue. And so I would like to propose a motion, and if it is, I'll speak to it afterwards, that the Parks Co-op student and the council contingency fund be removed from the 2020 budget, and that the 2020 EMR portion be funded out of the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve. Oh, sorry, I didn't complete. And that the deputy city clerk position be added to the budget. Thank you very much. So if I can speak to that, I spoke to it a little bit last time, that I think there's a lot of policy items that have been, Mr. Rudolph, Ms. Geary and her staff have brought up, that could really benefit from that additional horsepower in that department. They've been doing a lot, they've been producing a lot. We all benefit from it. Most departments always benefit from a strong clerk's office, because they sort of touch everything. So with that said, the way the math would work is that would equal, that addition plus those subtractions would equal about 0.18, and the deputy city clerk is 0.13, but we just approved 0.05. So if this motion was approved, it would add that additional position. There would be the reduction, obviously the contingency, the AMR would be coming out of the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve for this year, and the loss for the co-op student would put us back to where we started at the beginning of the day. They would both equal to 0.18 approximately.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brown. I'm going to let Ms. Fulla do some calculations while we go through a list of people who wish to speak to the motion, just to make sure that we're on board with the correct numbers, so that when people vote on this, they understand what the actual consequences are. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I would just appreciate some clarification, because I didn't get the first part of the motion. So I understand the proposed addition of the deputy city clerk. What were the deletions?
Thank you. Through His Worship to Councillor Thorpe and the rest of council, the deletions would be the Parks Co-op student, which is
Parks Co-op student.
Parks Co-op student, sorry, which is a 0.02, and the council contingency, which is approximately a 0.1. Those are the things that would be removed. The EMR for 2020, which is 0.06, would be funded from the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve, resulting in a total of 0.18, if my math is correct. The deputy, and just to reiterate, the deputy city clerk is a 0.13, which would be an addition, which if you're doing the math, that leaves a 0.05 left over, which we just added to the budget through the additional bylaw officers. So if this motion was approved, it would bring us right back down to where we started at the beginning of the day, with the reduction of the co-op student and the council contingency and the addition of the bylaw, extended hours, and the deputy city clerk.
Councillor,
May I,
yes,
Your
Councillor Thorpe. in
Thank you.
certain
So I
senses.
appreciate that clarification, and it's a somewhat multi-pronged motion. I can support part of it, but there's parts of it I can't support. So I will listen with interest to other councillors' opinions.
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Your Worship. This will be directed to Mr. Harding. So my question is, if the co-op student is removed from the budget, what is the impact? First question. And the second question is that not something that would be a good partnership with, I'm assuming the co-op student comes from VIU?
There we go. Your Worship, thank you to Councillor Armstrong. So we haven't been able to capitalize on some of the programs at VIU, particularly the master's program and the undergraduate program that is a co-op placement at the Recreation and Tourism program at VIU. So that's one of the areas that we would target. But it's also the idea of the co-op, which has been very successful in the engineering department and then also in the planning department, it's really get to some of those programs and those plans that we never get to. So there's a variety of different recreational and park and initiatives that we could bring a co-op student in for.
Thank you. For me, I agree with most of the motion, but I do struggle with the co-op student because I think it's a great opportunity for people to see what the city does, to maybe get people moving in that direction. And my last question, Your Worship, is if we remove the contingency fund, from my recollections, we can, if we need cash, it comes from the strategic infrastructure fund, which is not a reserve,
Yes, that is correct.
and that's not an issue to do that?
No, it
Thank
just,
you.
sometimes there's an administrative side to that, but there is no,
Okay, thank you. So the only issue I struggle with in the motion is the co-op student. The rest I'm supportive of. Thank you.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong answered asked both of my questions, but I would just like to clarify, if we don't put into council contingency this year, are we essentially saying we're taking that off the books and we're going to go through strategic infrastructure for the purposes that we would have gone through for council contingency? In which case, then, we need to be very aware of how much we're spending of that budget because we have access to so much more.
through your worship to Councillor Hemmons, that is correct. You have a much larger pot to pull from. You can still fund the things that you would fund out of the council contingency, out of that, but you just have access to a lot more money. So I think that answered your
Yep,
question.
it does. Thank you. And I'm in agreement with Councillor Armstrong. The Parks Co-op student, I like the sound of it, so I'm in agreement with everything except for that.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to staff. My question, is this co-op student a one-year option, or is the idea is that we'll be doing this on a regular basis? Sorry, Richard.
Your Worship, good. Councillor Bonner, the goal would be ongoing.
Be ongoing. Okay, thank you. And if I may, I'll speak in favor of this motion. I think that we can fund the AMR from our strategic infrastructure reserve because it's a 5-year program. It's not ongoing past that date as far as I understand. And so just bumping it back 1 year would just help politically. I know we're going to be spending the money anyway, and I think it's a great program. I just think if we can keep our taxes at 5.1, we'll have so much less grief.
Did you want to, Ms. Fuller, I think, has a,
Or do you want, no, go ahead.
please, whoever.
Through the mayor to Councillor Brown, it actually will slightly increase the property tax
property tax projected increase. So it actually, because we go to one decimal place, it will bring it to 5.2. And then the other item that I'd like to point out is if you are funding the EMR from the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve for 2020, that means in 2021 it will be shifted to property taxes, and that means you are just pushing that property tax increase from 2020 to 2021. So just to make council aware of that you're just pushing that increase out.
Push it to 2022.
Thank you. Councillor Martman.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to state I'm for everything in the motion except for I value the Parks Co-op student as well. So I'd like to see us fund that.
Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Worship. To me, it's not one where I don't value the Parks Co-op student. I think co-op programs are wonderful for a variety of reasons, both for the organization and both for the opportunities. It's just when I take a look at where our property taxation numbers are at, and the positions that I think would really most benefit the organization in the near term, we are wanting to do things, and we are, the things that we do have a high demand, and I think about the committees and the increasing the stats that were presented around governance, and I think those are all good things, and I think we've started to see some of that policy and bylaw refresh that we're told is needed. So when I look at that, I think the Parks Co-op student, there's so many things I'd love to see done in our parks, and little additional firepower may help. However, I have to say, well, the priority for me is the organization as a whole, and when trying to hold the line on property taxes or decrease them where possible, that just looked like one that the math could work, and I think it's a nice to have. I'm just not sure that it's necessarily a need to have at this time when we're talking about a 5% tax increase.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I appreciate the discussion, and I think I've clarified my thoughts on this. So if you don't mind, I'll express them. I support the idea of retaining the co-op student. First of all, I think that's valuable. I have concerns about pushing the EMR costs into next year. I appreciate the intent, but come next year, there's going to be other budget drivers that we're going to be faced with, and I just fear that we'll be in the same situation again. So I'm not in favor of just pushing that into next year. And the other thing that I'll express is I'm still struggling with putting council contingency or getting rid of council contingency and moving it into strategic infrastructure, simply, I guess, because of the term. And if it's a fund or a reserve for strategic infrastructure, it certainly should not be used, in my opinion, for operational matters, and it should be used for strategic infrastructure projects, not as a general pot for council to dip into whenever there's any small sort of emergent costs that come up. So I'm struggling with that change as well. And so all told, I can't support this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. Just to speak to the moving of the council contingency fund, I don't have an issue with that for the simple fact we have access to the reserve strategic fund anyhow. So if we want to spend too much money, we can still do it. And well, it's true. Like, I mean, it's like that's the concern. More money. I mean, that's the concern that, council contingency has $100,000. Once that's gone, then the next thing we would just go to the reserve strategic infrastructure fund anyhow. We've seen that in the past. We're always going to find ways, if we really feel strongly about it, to get the cash. So I think it's going to come down to this. If this council is going to go that route, then we need to show discipline when we go to it. And it's irrelevant whether it's 100,000 in contingency or 100,000 coming out of the infrastructure fund to me, because it comes down to, if we feel strongly about something, we're probably going to do it. We know that. It's going to probably get the votes. And then we're still going to have to fund it from either pot. And it's still overall the same taxpayers pot as we hear. It's just this way it won't have the impact on taxes this year. It will decrease it by 0.1%. So that's why I'm in favor. Thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. And just sum up my position on this, the main part of this motion, which I'm very much keen on, is the deputy city clerk manager position. And I think we really need that. And I'd be willing to go back to taxpayers and bump our taxes up more to pay for it. I just thought this motion was a really great way of getting everything and not increasing taxes. If we were to pull out the parks position and then go at it and then add it in later, then we'd still be looking at a 5.2% increase. It would be 5.22, I guess, or something like that. So I think that's the important part of this motion is that clerk position, which will definitely help us out in this year as we go through all of our policies and all of our bylaws and just make that work so much quicker. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bonner. Before I go to Councillor Hemmons, Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Worship. I was just going to let council know that there is the option of amending the motion and getting a seconder for that. Should you wish to amend the motion, you could do that.
Thank you. I was going to remind, when I started to speak, everyone of what the motion we were actually debating and the consequences of if no one moves an amendment. Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. I don't object to integrating our council contingency into the strategic infrastructure for the reasons that Councillor Armstrong gave. I also really agree that a deputy city clerk is a strong position to implement in the organization. My question is, there have been a few small pieces of funding, I'm thinking the SPCA, things of that nature. Is there anything in the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve that would not allow us to fund small things like that going forward? Like,
Your Worship.
essentially confirming that they operate in the same way. We can
Yes.
draw from them in the same way.
They do, yes.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm just going to repeat what I said a minute or two ago. Perhaps for the benefit of all, Ms. Gurry, if you could read back the motion as it stands so everyone knows what they're voting on precisely. We've had quite a discussion, which is healthy.
Perhaps, Your Worship, Councillor Brown could read it out for you.
That was the smoothest passing of the buck I've seen in a long time.
That puts me in an awkward position because I didn't actually write it down. But I can try to piece something together here.
I actually do have a draft that we could read out if you'd like. It's just rough, though. So it was moved and
If we could-
seconded that the Parks Co-op Student and Council Contingency Fund be removed from the budget, that the EMR be funded from the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve, and the Deputy City Clerk be added to the draft budget.
I would just add the only addition was that the EMR is funded from the council contingency for 2020. Yeah. And we would have to make that decision next year around, is it funded from general taxation or is it continued to be funded from the contingency?
Councillor Mervin.
I wanted to make the friendly, I didn't hear the student this time in the motion.
It's there.
But I wanted to make the friendly amendment of removing the student.
Second it, but I think it has to be.
Yeah, so a friendly amendment has to be agreed to by the mover and the seconder. Otherwise, you could make a formal amendment and have that seconded.
Yeah. So I'm trying to see if it's friendly or not.
Well, it won't be unfriendly either, but
I would probably suggest in this circumstance, we do it formally and you would get a seconder for that. So if there's a seconder to Councillor Martman's
Councillor
amendment,
Armstrong.
and then you would discuss and vote on the amendment now first.
So the amendment is the removal.
So the amendment is the removal of, I believe it's .02 in the budget and for the co-op student. And I believe for .02, we should keep it inside this budget.
In other words, the motion we're voting on is to retain the student
That's
co-op
correct,
position,
not
which
remove
doesn't
the
presently exist.
.02. Keep the .02 in the budget.
Councillor Hemmons.
If I could just have an updated percentage from Ms. Fuller?
Through the chair to Councillor Hemmons, you're still going to be at 5.2. We're working in the second decimal place.
Thank you, I'm in support.
Well, I'm going to take the contrary position. We don't have this position. It's not like we're throwing someone under the unemployment rolls. It's not like we're eliminating someone that Mr. Harding's department has come to rely on. So I'm not prepared to support the retention of that budgetary item. I'm with Councillor Brown on this one. I think it's an appropriate place for us to make our savings where possible. Like Councillor Bonner, I'm very conscious of the amount of this tax increase. This is not what we had anticipated last year. And as much as we're projecting smaller increases in the next 3 years, I think it behooves us to be as careful as we possibly can. So, all those in favor of the motion, the net effect of which will be to retain the co-op student position. That's the amendment. And opposed? Motion carries. We are now in the main motion
As amended, so.
as
As
amended.
So the main motion no longer has the co-op student in it.
Any further discussion on the main motion? Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you. Very quickly, Your Worship, through you, and in light of discussion, I will support the motion now, mainly because of the Deputy City Clerk position. I think it is very valuable. I don't like the other aspects to it, but I will swallow my reservations and support the motion. Thank you.
I'm afraid sometimes being a member of Council or Mayor is kind of like being a 5-year-old. You have to choke back the parsnips occasionally. Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. I'm also in support. However, I do want to voice, I learned in this year's budget process that what we project as next year's tax increase is just our starting point. It's not actually what we get to. And so the concept of pushing the EMR into next year does make me concerned. But I'm willing to support this motion based on the arguments given.
Anyone else? All those in favor of the motion? Contrary?
Are you? It's the mayor and Charlie.
Motion carries. I'm hesitant to ask this, but any further motions arising out of Ms. Mercer's presentation? Ms. Mercer.
Just one quick clarification. The EMR, we just want to clarify that is being funded from the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve. Is that?
Councillor Brown.
The motion was for 2020, so as it would be accounted for in previous years, I imagine it would still be retained in as out of property taxation for now, and then obviously council next year can make that decision if they wish to
Right, to carry.
continue to fund it out of the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve or put it in as an operating.
Okay, there was some confusion around whether it was council contingency or Strategic Infrastructure Reserve, so just wanted clarification. Thank you.
We haven't had the benefit of Mr. Rudolph's comments, and he's on my list, so I look forward and ask him to say a few words.
Interesting and entertaining. Just on a contingency issue, it may be helpful at some point in time following this, if this all goes through this way, to have a revisit from a bit of a policy context on the use of the strategic reserve and this issue, just to kind of tie it back together in case you wanted to put some rigor around yourselves or the piece around that, just so we can follow up perhaps a staff report to finance and audit in January or something like that, just to cover the bases, make sure we're clear in the utilization of that fund, and it might provide a mechanism for clarity and possibly even some comfort for those that are not entirely comfortable with that, just the removal and opening up that other broader account for perhaps, what I'm saying is I think it would be helpful to have some rigor around that other account, and so we can do a report that would come back to you on that. I'm not suggesting you need a motion on that, but we would endeavor to do that if you're amenable to that.
Councillor Martman.
Thank you. I was looking at the service enhancements to dog licensing, which would not be, if I have this correct, because it would come from the IT reserve, it would not impact taxes. And if memory serves me right, it was about enhancing the way that you might be able to do things online for dog licensing?
Through your worship. Yes, so we eventually want to get on to online services for all of our services. However, this one, we are a little tight in the IT infrastructure, or the IT reserve, so we want to build that reserve up a little bit. We do have a workaround for this year. We can always look at that next year and add it at that point. But we do have a workaround that should be acceptable to the public.
Okay, thank you.
So if nothing further, should we move on to reports? Seeing no objection, we're on to reports. Ms. Mercer, Ms. Fuller, thank you very much. We're going to do the next steps. We have to go through that, yes. Yes, sorry.
So unless council requests more deliberation time, we can prepare the budget bylaw as add the changes we had today, and bring it back for first 3 readings on December 16th and adoption in early January. Or we could, after we have the town hall meeting tonight, we could come back on the 9th and seek more direction from council, and then go for first 3 readings again on December 16th or early January, depending on what, if any, changes were made at that point. Or we could have another session at our December 18th Finance and Audit Committee, and then go for first 3 readings and adoption in early January. So it's up to council as to what you would like to do.
Councillors Bonner and then Armstrong.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm recognizing that tonight we're having an e-town hall meeting on the budget, and we pretty well solidified it at today's meeting. So I would certainly like to listen to the input of the public on what we've decided up till now, and then have an opportunity, if there are any changes, to make those changes. So I'd be looking at alternate 1, I think.
Councillor Armstrong.
Concur with Councillor Bonner.
Well, when looking at my council chambers, the left and the right are agreeing. What more could we ask for? Do we require a motion, Ms. Mercer, Mr. Rudolph? I think we're
Your
fairly
Worship,
clear.
I think what we would do then is schedule a special finance and audit piece of the schedule for next Monday as a contingency, should you want to have further conversation. It may be a short one, or it could be a long one, but just have that as a placeholder. And then, of course, then the idea would be to move forward to the formal council meeting on the 16th for your reading. So we had thought that could be a good contingency process anyway, in case you need it.
And so we have a little time, subject to advice tonight from the good citizens of Nanaimo who are going to participate in the town hall. If there's anyone on the staff or on council who has some very good ideas about how to reduce the potential tax increase between now and the 9th, that would be welcomed, I assure everyone. All right. Thank you. Mr. Harding.
Change some seats here for a second. So thank you for this time on fees and charges. And we know that fees and charges doesn't sound that exciting, but hopefully in this, what we're trying to do today is a little bit more philosophical aspects of fees and charges. And so, just gonna wait for Ms. Williams to join us. So the presentation really focuses on how and why a municipality provides parks and recreation culture services to the community. So even though we're going to, at the end of the day, get into some what a bylaw should be, it's really more of philosophy. Why do we provide parks and recreation and culture services? So this was more of a GPC time, so it's really a chance for us to have a discussion of fees and charges in general. So Liz is going to join me a little bit with the presentation, but we also have some recreation managers that are here to provide some background for us. So before we get started, is there any questions from council? If you want to just refer to the report, just want to make sure you see the report. It's been a number of years since we have done a bylaw. So the last actual change to the fees and charges bylaw was 2013, with the last fee increase in 2015. So if there's any questions of why we're a little delayed, we can talk about those now, but we can get into this in a few moments.
I think your report somewhat addressed that, Mr. Harding, if there's anyone who has a question.
And also, in the past, the Parks, Recreation, Culture Commission would have taken this on and done quite a long review as part of their work plans, and council would have provided for them.
Just as a matter of background, if you can answer this, other municipalities on the island or municipalities of similar size, is it generally speaking done on an annual basis, or is it the bite the bullet every 3 or 4 years approach that Nanaimo's taken?
So in the past, when council was a 3-year term, we would do typically a 3-year bylaw. So the first year of council would have tasked the commission with review of the bylaw, but then would have updated it probably the June of that year, the following year, with implementation in September. We're providing a little bit with you right now on the same thing. We're going to kick off today with a bit of a session with you. Again, getting back to some of the background of why, first of all, why do we even provide parks and recreation and culture services, which is a discussion to itself, how those are provided, and then realistically, a parks, recreation, culture fees and charges bylaw. I wish we could say through this there's a perfect formula. We can just plug in some numbers, but the issue of our fees is really a community decision, and community decision back to council of how you want to provide those services. And so a lot of this presentation is a lot with that. With that, just so Liz is going to take about half of this presentation, but in the audience we also have manager of arenas who can answer anything, Damon Johnson, our recreation programs with Darcy, our aquatics with Kathy, and the business service side with Laura. So if you want to get into the details with it. So part of this is really open for discussion, so please stop me anytime during the presentation, because it's really a chance for a discussion, because this is where we kind of say, well, where do we want to be as a community in regards to these fees? And also within your report, we have the existing bylaw for we can refer to. So if nothing else, we'll get going on here.
Thank you, please.
So what we're trying to do for the agenda today is a mission statement and goals of the Parks, Recreation, Culture Division. And we say that because it's really what helps drive staff of what we do with our programs. And with the programs also then determines what services we provide and therefore what fees we have. And some other guiding documents that we use, which is the 2005 master plan, but also we'll talk a little bit about the delivery system of who actually provides these kind of services throughout. We'll spend just a little bit of time on a National Recreation Summit that happened in 2015. And the reason we mention this is that it is one that's going across Canada. Many municipalities use this. We use this as staff in dividing some of our goals and objectives. But it's also, I think, very consistent with some of what this particular council has talked about last year. And so I think it's relevant that we see that it's consistent throughout. Then this section here is the philosophy, rationale and philosophy, is really where I'd like to spend some time. It's where we could stop and talk about some of those ideas of what, if this council wants to change something in regards to how we do this bylaw. Then we'll go areas where the fees and charges are applied based on the existing bylaw, and then some ideas how we see us going forward. Then other considerations of fees, including accessibility for economically disadvantaged. This is our LEAP program. So even though it's mentioned in the bylaw, it's an issue that comes up quite a bit. Council gets questioned on this quite a bit. So we think we might as well use this time to kind of go through the LEAP program. It is a council policy. It's referenced in the bylaw, but it's really not part of the bylaw. But it's a good chance for us to have some discussion about that, because there is some issues moving forward on that. And then discussion at the very end, input moving forward with an updated bylaw. And we'll go through the process. But really today is just the overall introduction of it. The background will come to you in, we hope, January, February with an actual draft bylaw. But again, we'll base some of those that draft bylaw on our discussion with you. Okay. So I won't read out all of the that's the mission statement that the division uses.
Sorry, I may have missed this earlier. The screen below is different than the presentation I have. You have the 2005 master plan in there as the part of the agenda. It's not on mine that I have.
It just I just put it on part of the agenda because it was in my presentation all the time. It just we didn't add it on the agenda part here.
Okay.
But it was in the body of the presentation. And we'll see. I'll show you what we mentioned when we get to it. So the mission statement, the mission of Parks, Recreation, and Culture Division is to enhance the quality of life and leisure in Nanaimo. And then we use a variety of goals to drive that. Again, we'll go through each of them, but these are aspects that we utilize to how we design and develop the services we provide. And for Council Bonner, this aspect here is another driving aspect. The 2005 master plan, again, gave us some direction. City should focus itself on services where there's a demonstrated public good, and we'll hear that a lot in today's presentation. Work with and through other sectors where viable, and again, we'll talk a lot about where we don't provide the services, where we work with groups to provide those services, or where we need to provide those services. Provide services at skill levels with an emphasis on basic levels and variety, and balance quality with quantity, and reduce barriers to access. So those are some key aspects in the 2005 plan that drive what we do. Okay. And this slide is one where, even though we're a very large department and we provide lots of services, so in the delivery of overall parks, recreation, culture services, we're definitely not the only ones doing it. We have the parks, we have the municipal system, which also a little bit with the RDN system. But then still, and I still say, and I say this many times over the years, still the variety of, or a good majority of delivery of recreation services and cultural services, maybe not so much park services, is done by nonprofit organizations. And a lot of what we do is really to establish and maintain them, everything from Port Theatre to soccer clubs, minor hockey. There's literally hundreds of organizations, if not over 1,000, in providing services within city facilities, city parks, fields, throughout the community. And then, of course, there's other institutions. School District 68 still does a lot of those areas, VIU, Island Health. And then, of course, there's the public or the private sector. So we mentioned these is that even though we have the fees and charges bylaw is important, and what we do is very important, there's all a bunch of other organizations that do provide services.
In terms of those services, if I may ask, and we provide a lot of playing fields, all sorts of things, where's the growth in demand? Is it kids soccer? Is it ice time? Like, what's the demographic of the community is changing, presumably? And I suspect you can give me a rough idea of where the next ask is coming from.
Well, and I think, Your Worship, it's also, if we look over the last 30 years, some of the services we provided 30 years ago aren't played at all anymore. And some of the things we have now weren't 30 years ago. There was no pickleball.
I was waiting for that because one of the younger councillors, seconded by one of the graying members, is surprised that the mayor is not familiar with pickleball, which apparently is an endemic problem with my age bracket. You're not familiar with pickleball.
I've tried it.
But in general, we'll see when we get into the recreation, some of the findings. I think what we're finding more is a lot of more participatory aspects that aren't direct programmed. So you'll see the growth in, for example, mountain biking or bike parks, urban gardens, dog off leash parks, There's a lot of those going on. There's still there's no one else is going to put on aquatic programs like we do, and very few will ever put on arenas, and those will continue to grow and have demand. But those are some of those areas. But we also find people want to do more drop-in than they want to necessarily do a 12-week program. So those types of aspects are changing.
Is that change having any impact on our planning around capital programs? I mean, if you've got a piece of turf and it requires some trails on it or something, or a court, that's not the same as throwing up a ice arena, for instance, in terms of capital expenditure. So again, just in a general, looking out over the next 5 or 10 years and what's happening now, I'm curious to get some idea of where we're going to be going, or what, as I say, what the demands are going to be.
Right, and I think if I go back, the updated master plan that we're working on now, hopefully will answer some of those for council as we go for engagement, public engagement. One of the things I was mentioned when we did the 1994 Parks and Open Space Master Plan, and we did a solid statistically significant random sample of the population. What came back was a surprise to us. It was majority of the public at the time in 94 that didn't come up with arenas or pools or anything else. The number one request was trails and access to water. And so the council at the time was able to change our priorities, and we were able to do that through some of the development. So I think when we go into the updated master plan now, we'll ask some of those questions, some of those demographics information will come forward, and hopefully answer that question a lot more. There's always going to be demand for different services. It's just getting what is the larger demand. Does that help? And so again, this is an important slide because at times there's definitely, we'll come back to this a bit, we provide a lot of services. There's lots of other services that are being provided by other groups and organizations. And particularly we'll talk sometimes about the private sector, because there's some where if the private sector is doing it and they're doing it well, and there's no need for us to be into it, we don't get into that area. Just want to mention this on the Recreation Summit because it is one that it was significant in 2015 when they met, and it's continued to move forward in shaping a lot of strategies in different municipalities across Canada. They're looking at a number of issues confronting Canada's public health crisis, and we'll see more and more of why we're in certain aspects of creating parks and recreation services to deal with that. Respecting nature and our environment, building community, social innovation, community recreation and sport, and repositioning recreation. When they came up with those 5 key areas to focus on. Recreation is an essential public good, works with others, affects health, social and personal needs, part of quality of life sector, community at the core, access to recreation, and connect to people. And again, why am I mentioning this in the fees and charges? Because as you'll notice as we get into the next slides, we have to decide at what level do we want the public good. We value some public good aspects versus personal benefits, and then who pays. So that gets into how we'd use a lot of what we do with the fees and charges bylaw is a benefits-based approach. So to differentiate between personal direct benefits to individuals and indirect benefits to all citizens. And again, this is a real area of community where every community is a little different. So again, we can't give an actual formula for you to plug in. There's some aspects that we can show, and we have done with regards to best practices. But at the end of the day, it's really what a community wants to do.
To put it in concrete terms, I rarely go to a pool, and people who swim, you build an expensive facility for people who swim, but most everybody takes a walk along the waterfront walkway. That's kind of what you're talking about in a sense.
That's right. And then there's also, if you get back to where the very roots of recreation that stemmed out of was dealing with youth and how to get youth off the streets or youth, and so that's where a lot of the benefits of recreation grew out of the youth, dealing with youth. And now, of course, it's grown into all aspects, and we're from 0 to 100 and some years old now in servicing parks and recreation and culture services.
Appreciate you putting this to Council because it's a very important question, frankly. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I was actually writing the question on that. There's a philosophical difference between charging fees for a service that citizens use and say not charging fees for the use of our roads. These are, again, a service that we provide that citizens use. To me, it seems like the difference is in the facilities where someone walks through the door, we can actually count people and charge them a fee. And the facilities that where you don't have a door, we can't count people walking through, we don't charge a fee. So I'm wondering, philosophically, is that something we should be doing, or should we just be making it free for everybody?
Well, the next slide will help you have a discussion about that, hopefully.
Thank you.
Because I like this next slide, even if no one else ever does in my department. So this is a benefit and cost approach to provision of parks, recreation, and culture rates and fees. And so I've used two continuums on here. So direct impacts and benefits. So benefits few, and it benefits, on the other end of the continuum, 100% benefits all in the community. And then the other one of the continuum to put over top of it is the community determines. And so in input that you'll get when we bring a bylaw to you, to council, at the end of the day, the community being yourselves will determine, is it 100% user pay, or is it 100% taxpayer pay? And so within, I've told this worked, but I don't see it seems to work. Anyway, yeah. It's not working now, Jessica. Oh, there it is. There it is. Oh, they can't see it. Oh, right. Okay. You can't see it anymore. So realistically, along the continuum is where we want to be. Overall, the Parks, Recreation, Culture division is about 70% taxpayer pay, 30% user pay. And even that's, you can move a little bit because part of that revenues from the RDN contributing area, which is taxpayers also. So this is a slide that I think is one where I wish I could see you can be anywhere along this line. It's where the community wants to be, and sometimes we're along this line depending about, and when Liz starts to speak about different user groups, we move along this line based on what Councillor Bonner is mentioning as whether some of those uses. So for example, if you take the Inn and Trail, it's 100% taxpayer pay, but it's definitely not 100% of the taxpayers utilize it. And then on the other extreme would be, what's the example you used?
Arenas, 56.
Yeah, so Arena Ice Time, it's probably around 50% user pay versus taxpayer pay. Anything on this one? I'm going to put this slide at the very end again, because I think it's one that we can, again, talk about. So this was a quote that I took from a textbook that I think still works well. It says the fees should be charged when the service of our facility being provided is enjoyed by a limited user group rather than the general public, and when significant identified costs can be attributed. In the development of the existing bylaw, these aspects were looked at, and staff will continue to use the majority of these moving forward to developing the updated one. That fees provide accessibility for most taxpayers. That fees are straightforward and easily administered. That fees generally mirror cost of living increases. That fee rates are comparable to other municipalities in Vancouver Island. And this is probably where we're at. The most continuous aspect is that we, so swim in Nanaimo, probably comparable to a swim in Ladysmith, to Duncan, so forth. So we use a lot of those comparables on some of those drop-in areas, but we could be different in other aspects of particular rental rates. That admissions for children, students, and seniors are subsidized in comparison to adult admissions. Was there something you can add to this one?
That was me.
And so the main aspect or policy principle, general principle in the existing bylaw is fees and charges should supplement tax appropriations as a source of revenue for parks, recreation, culture. That should be division, but it will be division in the new one. Services and facilities, and should not be the primary source of funds for their operation. So and that gets into the revenue for fees and admissions where we currently, this is the 217. We used the 217 numbers because our 218 numbers were a little off with as we implemented the new software package, but they're very comparable. So these are some of these are the general fees that utilize. This bylaw will affect a majority of these fees. So no question on that one. I'm going to move it over now to the existing existing bylaw, you may want to follow, it may not necessarily follow along, but Liz will go through the existing bylaw and how do we utilize it, plus how do we use some of our other programs that aren't part of the bylaw.
Test. Works. All right, so we have, in recreation, we have drop-in admissions, which is a chunk, and then we have registered programs, and we have facility rentals. So our registered programs are designed to cover the instructor wages, materials and supplies, external equipment, space rental, and in most cases cover the cost of running the program. There are a few exceptions to that, like the LIT Quest Youth Program, where we run that program at a loss in order to provide that program. We do, yeah, as said before, we use some of the revenues to augment the new or low-cost programs that we bring into the facility. Is there any questions around direct programs? These are the ones you would find in the activity guide.
Councillor Bonner.
And so, like, I take dance classes, right? And so this would be one of these things that we're talking about. So there is a specific fee for something in which someone is being paid, and if nobody wanted to take dance classes, they wouldn't be paid, sort of thing.
We have a minimum number. If we didn't reach that minimum number, the program wouldn't run.
And so, does the program exist sometimes because somebody came forward and said, I would like to put on this program and I'd like to make money as the instructor?
Yes and no. So we don't do it, we put out, biannually, we put out a call for program proposals. So if the program comes in and it's a good fit for public recreation, then we'll communicate directly with that instructor.
I see, okay, thanks.
Yeah. So general admission fees, this refers to any drop-in program you're going to do, whether you have a swim and skate pass into the pool or you're doing a drop-in. These are probably the most subsidized of the costs we have coming in. We break it into different categories of use, so children under 2 are free, children age category 3 to 12, youth 13 to 18, adult, family, and then we have seniors and our super seniors. So children 2 and under are free, the super seniors are also free coming into the facilities. The super seniors we brought in about 6 years ago. It's a very heavily used program. Small number, but heavy users.
And is that number increasing?
Yes, it is.
And if Your Worship, I just mentioned again, why we showed some of those national...
Pickleball, is it, or?
Why we showed some of the National Summit aspects and some of those changes into health is where do we want to see ourselves in providing recreation services to assist in people's health.
So the one area I'll mention here is we're looking at the youth rate, which is currently 13 to 18. We also have a student rate, which is targeted just for students coming into the facility, so someone at VIU or other universities. The one area where that 18 to 20 is, youth has a lot of different definitions to it, so if you're looking at Stats Canada, it goes up to 24. So we're looking at that rate, whether we want to adjust that rate and open it up to a broader youth age range.
So those are some of the, when we come back with our changes report, we'll come with some of those options for council's consideration.
So rental facilities, and in your page 37 of your council agenda is our rental facilities. We use 2 primary factors to determine how we charge people, the type of group and the function. The type of group we break into youth nonprofit and or adult nonprofit, local government or school district groups, private, social, religious, political, and labor groups, and commercial groups. So there's 4 categories we use to determine rates. And we also look at the type of function they're doing. So a meeting would be 4 hours or less. A program would be, or a workshop would be up to 8 hours. Social events typically are much longer and may include food and drink, and then commercial events like a traditional trade show. Or Kris Kringle would be a good example of a commercial event.
Go back to, Your Worship and Council, just want to, on this slide and the previous slide, if you go to the previous slide too, Liz. So these two slides is where Council gets a lot of requests and pushback. So about why is my group being charged, and why can't we waive these fees, and isn't this our service is very important to the community, and so this is, again, getting back to the purpose of a fees and charges bylaw is that the community does have a bylaw set for its facilities, and generally everybody knows who's going to pay for what and how, so that we're not always going back and forth on every request that council may get or staff may get. So these two slides, although we're going through them relatively quickly, are real keys to a fees and charges bylaw.
Councillor Himmons.
Thank you. I'm curious if we do make special exceptions for groups. Have we in the past, or is the bylaw kind of
One of the reasons
follow to the rule?
This is why we have the bylaw, Councilor Himmons, through Your Worship, again is that it's clarity for, getting back to my first slides, it provides community clarity of how we're going to provide parks and recreation and culture services. So that we decide as a community, as a council, this is how we're going to recover some of those costs. And if you want a facility that may be a great benefit, I can't think of a group actually that's in our facilities that doesn't consider what they do a benefit. How do we want to do that? And so again, it's tough to go along there. And we'll use the one that I know council gets questions right now. That's the farmers market at Bevan Park in the Centennial Building. It's a great service, but they fall within two kind of categories here. And so if we want to change those types of things, this is where we'd have to change it. But we change for one, then it's changed for all.
Okay, I think that's an important distinction. Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. And on this slide, local registered nonprofits, is that registered with Canada CRA, registered charities, or is it just societies within the BC Act?
It's registered societies.
BC, right? We use the BC Act.
So in theory, could also not a political group be a BC society as well?
Through the chair, Councillor Bonner, we have a special category for the political and religious groups for that. So if they're a registered political group, then they would fall into the third category. We do have quite a few.
Okay, and we just picking these categories based on anything, or is it practiced of other municipalities?
I'd say it's Your Worship, it's a combination of amending over the years based on, again, where the community wants to be. Every bylaw's come forward to council. Again, the commission used to vet a lot of this and have different meetings with groups and organizations, but it would be a change based on any kind of changes the community had. Definitely we've used best practices from other communities and brought those forward.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I'd just like to comment that I think having this bylaw is extremely important and useful because if we did not have it, we would be, staff or council would be faced with, I'm sure, a never-ending stream of deserving groups coming to ask for a reduction in their user rates or waiving of those rates. The bylaw is fair to all. And certainly in some cases, those groups, if they wish to recoup some capital, they can apply for city grants if applicable and go that route and get some return that way. But I think it's very important to have this bylaw overarching all rental groups. It just takes all judgment calls out of the picture. And if I may, Your Worship, a very basic question before we go any further, whether it's user pay or taxpayer pay, am I correct in stating that the whole purpose of our revenue collection is simply to cover operating costs of our programs and the facilities and maintaining them. We're not here to make a profit on Parks and Rec.
Right, Your Worship, through the Councillor Thorpe, all those are correct. I think also in the sense of why we have a bylaw and not waiving fees is as you're going through the bylaw, the budgeting process right now, we use our past revenues to determine your tax rates. So if Parks and Recreation it fluctuated drastically, of course the predictions from finance would be a little bit more difficult of how we try. So $8 million in revenue is still significant in the sense of how we offset Parks, Recreation, Culture Division expenditures.
Thank you.
But also on those other side, again, with it is where we want to go along that continuum again is where is the discussion. Sorry, Liz.
So other considerations that affect our rates, and this is mostly to facility bookings. The matrix, you have an example of the matrix in your package there. We also look at the quality of the space they're going into, so an artificial turf field versus a grass field is a bit more money. The size of the space, so a meeting room for 50 versus 500, the prices fluctuate there. Amenities at a space, so some of our fields have nice change rooms. Other of our fields do not have change rooms, so the prices fluctuate depending on amenities at those locations. We also have other external tariffs and interests that we have to implement. So we have resound and SOCAN fees that we are obligated to collect and remit to those organizations. And there is more pressure on groups to provide insurance for their events coming through. So those additional prices are passed on to the consumer, which impacts the price to the consumer, but it's not coming back to Parks and Rec.
Worship, just to add one aspect here, we didn't include it in the presentation, but also in our fees and charges is the 20% contribution to our facility development reserve. And so that generates just over $1 million.
Just over $1 million, yeah.
Just over $1 million a year. And we use those funds, which I think is a good way, another way of those who are using facilities to actually pay for some of the improvements. So those dollars go back to capital and operating capital expense improvements to facilities. So for example, if you go for a swim at the aquatic center and it costs X dollars, 20% of those dollars will go back into that reserve, which then are utilized to go back into maintenance and maintaining those facilities.
We also have specialized service within our facilities. Generally, it's full cost recovery, so we have food and beverage at Frank Careen Arena, the Aquatic Center, and Bevan Park. Those are contracts of use. They pay us to be there. Equipment rentals or field lights, we charge the actual cost of that, so we know how much it costs to have lights on the fields. That's above the cost of a field rental if you're using the fields at nighttime. And license and leases, I'll let you speak to that.
And so those, again, based on some of our tenants in facilities like the swim shop or I always call them CVI, but anyway, our actual leaseholders within our facilities, they pay market rent and licenses for those.
Accessibility and inclusion. So we have a few programs. LEAP is the top one there, but I'll leave that for the next slide. We have sponsored or low-cost swims. Right now, Lions Club sponsors quite a few swims and skates that are free to the public to come into. We also have keep a list of free or low-cost programs. So our playground program in the summer, for example, is free to children to use. Our 80-plus passes are free, and we have our grade 5-6 active pass. So when you're in grade 5, you have a year of free swimming at Parks and Recreation, free swimming or skating. And then the reason grade 5 was selected is because that's the year we see a lot of children dropping out of fitness. So that's why that program's in place in cooperation with the school district. And then the grade 5 is just a certain number of passes to try and keep that momentum going.
Councillor Armstrong has a question.
I don't know if you can answer this or not, but now with the increase in hip and especially knee surgeries, one of the rehabs is the pool. Is that covered under VHOD, do you know, or medical, or do they pay out of pocket?
I don't know.
Okay, I'll find
I
that
know
out, thank
they
you.
know when they come in, they're paying us, so
Okay.
I'm not sure how they utilize.
So they pay out of pocket, and then they might be able to claim it on their medical or whatever,
Yeah,
then,
with
depending on
the-
their plan.
Yeah, with the physiotherapy place, actually,
I can find out, don't worry about it.
Aspect on that one? When they come in?
Pay out of pocket.
For the physiotherapy, they pay admissions through the plan.
Okay, so they pay through, physiotherapy pays us through it,
Okay.
okay.
Thank you.
Just out of curiosity, how many 80-plus years passes do we have?
Liz has that for you.
I know that number.
You know I was going to ask
There's a
that
few
question.
numbers that Liz may want to mention on here. Again, on this, we also have our grade 3 Swim Survive program, which is a partnership with the school district. So there's a number of other programs that we do with it. But there's, I think these, under accessibility and inclusion, there's a few numbers that I think Liz may want to share with you here.
I'll give you a rundown. We currently have to date for 2019, have sold 18,766 memberships. And they vary, so that's 1 month or 12-month passes. 297 of those are 80-plus memberships, but have scanned in 13,000 times. So that tells you how often they're using the facilities.
Giving new meaning to the term active seniors.
They're very active seniors, yes. They're super seniors.
It goes through some of the numbers.
Yep, so our grade 5, we have 616 grade 5 students with memberships this year, 445 grade 6. And on to the next slide, we have 733 LEAP adult registered and 237 LEAP children registered for memberships this year.
Councillor Turley.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Through you to, I don't know if it's Mr. Harding or, I see the use of community centers for commercial with a higher rate, which I understand. The question I have is hockey camps, power skating courses that sometimes are put on by private individuals, are they considered commercial or how does that work?
They are, I'll confirm that with Mr. Johnson, though.
Yes, they are.
Just here.
Thank you.
So our Leisure Economic Access Program started in 1993.
I believe.
Yes, it's been around for quite a while.
Just on, it was initially, and for many years, it was just for children. And it was not until quite later that we opened it up to adults.
Currently, they are given a 50% discount, so anyone on the program is given a 50% discount for up to $40 for 4 courses per year. They also are given 50 free admissions to any of our drop-in programs, so swim, skating, or the gymnasium drop-in programs we have.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. I think this program is really wonderful. And I'm wondering if there's, in our consideration of fees, will we be looking at elevating the minimum family income that's required to qualify? I'm thinking of, for lack of a better term, the working poor. So often there's a lot of subsidies for those on social assistance, but for those families who are just getting by, probably making just a little bit more than this, and this program and these passes would be really valuable. Is it something we'll consider?
So, Your Worship, to the Council Hammonds, so this is a separate policy, council policy, and so it's definitely one that we can bring forward in unison with the bylaw for review and consideration. Like I mentioned earlier, it's mentioned in the bylaw, but it's really a council policy. And what we've been doing with this one for the last few years is just continuing to adapt it based on the poverty, federal poverty rate based on per person per household. But there's other options you can look at. I know Liz has some background on this now in regards to the child
Federal tax credit.
tax credit does make a lot of families not able to access this. I don't know if you have any more details on that.
So currently, we use the federal low-income cutoff rates for this program. So this is certainly something we would bring back to council for recommendations. There are a lot of programs. Most communities have a LEAP-type program in their communities. They are all very different, but most use the low-income cutoff numbers. Anecdotally, what we're seeing with the increase in the federal child tax credit for people with low income is it's bumping them over the limits right now.
Yeah.
So we've seen a change in the number of families eligible for the program.
And when we talk about, I mean, I use this example all the time, but as we're dealing with a homelessness and addictions crisis, stuff like this, connecting children into recreation, connecting them into community through recreation is prevention and action. And so I would really love to see us not just do what other municipalities are doing, but actually excel at this, particularly with our child poverty rates in this community. I think it's really important.
And
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. Is there the potential then just to stay with the account of low-income cutoffs and not include the federal child tax credit, which I think is bumping people over? So instead of taking that into consideration, just use the base?
Your Worship, what we could do to Councillor Armstrong, again, again, the discussion, around the table discussion here of what council would like us to look at, different options we can bring back.
Would
with you on that.
Would that make a big difference to numerous families if we just said, okay, we're going to slowly base this on your income is below stats, Canada low-income cutoffs, excluding the federal tax credit for children?
What's the numbers again? If you remember a month or so ago, when we did the presentation to you on the prescription for health, on barriers to activity. Yep. So if you think of the size of our community, and really there's only 237 children registered through LEAP, but there's something that's not a very high number. So there's other barriers that we need to look at. So coming back on how to utilize it more.
Thank you.
But Your Worship, again, if even council wants to give direction to staff to come back with a separate report when we do the bylaw on LEAP, we're more pleased to do that.
Councillor Martin, sorry.
Thank you. Just following on Councillor Hemmons, and it's coming up on the next slide, the fees and charges, considerations, etc. Firm believer in youth being involved, especially in team sports. And being that I was low income as a single mom with 2 kids, and I actually coached softball for 6 years before it came up to the rec league. Those soccer and softball are almost the only sports that low income can afford, because all you need is a baseball mitt and cleats, or cleats for soccer. I don't know and you might not be able to answer this right now. We did receive an email in regards to the Softball Association for Nanaimo on what the impact on raising the fees for the fields would be. And it seems so minuscule in our big budgets. I think it was, memory serves me right, it was about $3,000 a year is what the increase was going to be approximately. What would be the impact if those low income, and it's not just people in low income, everybody, all children enjoy those sports, but what would it be if we took, and just the sports fields didn't increase those fees? I'm just throwing it out there.
So Your Worship, in general, on sports fields, we're about a 10% recovery for our fees on sports fields for what it costs the community. So we're still pretty low on our sports field recovery. Doesn't mean, again, those are the kind of discussions if council wants to go back and reduce those fees or keep the fees the same, those are all those in those areas. But then the only thing to discuss is how does that affect the ice users, the pool users, gym users, the other users of the facilities. So that's why we instituted field fees years ago, because some communities still don't have field fees.
Yeah.
We did a few years ago for a number of reasons. One is there was, and still is, a little bit of block booking when not utilizing the fields as much. So having some kind of a fee at least make sure that they're going to actually utilize them. But again, those are the philosophical questions we can move along that continuum again. And where do we want to be?
Okay, thank you.
So, and in general numbers, we're around between 174,000 to 200,000 for field annually. It's probably closer to about the 174 with all our field use.
Thank you.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. Could I just clarify a statistic that you gave? 70% is taxpayer pay and 30%, or did I reverse that?
Yeah, if you looked at the overall PRC expenditures versus revenues, we're around 70%.
Okay.
In that, there's a bunch of things we'd have to drill down into and look at a little bit more, but real
Roughly.
grouse is overall. And those are also the grants going out. So, for example, we give a grant out to the Port Theatre, but that doesn't include the revenues that the Port Theatre gets to offset there. So it's not the best number. So, or the art gallery or the museum doing, other cultural groups doing their revenue. We're not taking their revenue back into consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Reviewing the bylaw next steps. So we're looking at fees and charges consideration. So on page 28 of your council package today, it basically gives you all of the hows and whys we charge. And we'd be looking at those, reviewing those. The continuity of classifications. We've had some inconsistency in our bylaw between our classifications between fields, arenas, and facilities. So we are looking at putting in some better continuity between our areas. Reformat for clarity and ease of use. I don't know if any of you have been in there to try and figure out what it would cost you to rent a building, but good luck. It's a complicated fees and charges document. Fee comparison to other communities, we are continually doing that. Our professional organization, British Columbia Parks and Recreation Association, provides us with fees only in pools and arenas, but we're able to compare to other communities. And for drop-in fees, we tend to look at Vancouver Island because we are not Vancouver. So we tend to stick to communities, like communities, Prince George, Kelowna, Penticton. And then we would come forward with some recommended fee adjustments moving forward into a new bylaw.
And so, Your Worship, we'll get into some discussion soon, but going forward, so background report now with some discussion. Based on today's discussion, we'll continue to work on a draft to bring forward to council early in 2020, ideally, famous last words, but January, early February, if we can. Then let that draft, if for council's consideration, you may send us back with some more changes based on that, but if we do get direction, then we would let the community groups know, the user groups know what council's direction is. We then would have to bring a bylaw forward to you for consideration. All in all, our goal is to get a new 4-year bylaw in place with incremental changes so that we could implement September 1st, 2020. So we have to move backwards a bit. So if we're going to do get our activity guide out, we'll need to have the bylaw in place end of May, early June at the latest, so that we could produce our activity guide. And we picked September 1st because that is a lot of our major facility uses, particularly arenas and pools, from September to May for groups and organizations, but also our field users and others. So it's an area of typically where we base our bylaw from.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. What is the plan for community engagement on this? Like, how will we seek input from the community on any fee changes?
So we've been the different managers have been working with their user groups and letting them know what we're working on. Everyone knows everyone's had quite a break of any fee increases for a number of years now because we haven't had any increases since 2015. So all user groups know that something's going to come at some point in time, so we try to keep them advised of that. It's really what percentage are we going to do to start catching back up on some of those cost of living expense aspects for fees. So if we present the draft to council, we would then send that out for a review. We haven't planned any open houses or anything on that, but it would be sending out to user groups on that. If council wants to do more liaison in the sense of having open houses or different stakeholder group meetings, we can have those also.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Excuse me, through you, Mr. Harding and Ms. Williams. I'm looking forward to coming forward. It's overdue to the honor of your control, Mr. Harding. But as you point out, it's been 4 years at least since these were examined. Nobody likes to have to pay more for services, including everybody at this table. And as we'll find out later this evening, at budget time, nobody likes it when taxes go up. But the fact is that our expenses at the city have gone up, and expenses to maintain facilities and keep them in the condition that our citizens want them have gone up, probably 8 to 10% over the past 4 years. So whether it's user pay or whether it's taxpayer pay, if citizens want these facilities and these offerings, then somebody has to pay for them. So we want to be as fair as possible, and I love your teeter-totter balancing act there between taxpayers and user payers, but that's going to be a very interesting discussion, and we'll rely on your report and best practice from other areas. While, if I may, Your Worship, and this is not directly related to fees and this discussion of the bylaw, while Mr. Harding and several members of his staff are here, I have to express my appreciation and my, I guess, gratitude for the work that you and your department have done, Ms. Williams, and the staff that are with us here today, some of the senior staff. I noticed Councillor Brown had a copy of the latest activity guide, and if anybody has not looked through that activity guide, I think they'll be absolutely blown away by the number and the variety of offerings that our city puts out there for our citizens to enjoy and take advantage of. And full credit to our staff for making that happen. The other thing I'd ask you to comment very briefly on, if I may, while I'm on this soapbox, is what I consider an extremely important program to our community, and that is the Leaders in Training and the Quest program. Could you just comment briefly on that for those who might not be too aware of it?
Right, Ms. Williams mentioned it a little while ago, just on one of the programs, but you can give some more on it right now with LEAP and.
Through the chair to Councillor Thorpe, our LIT Quest program is in its coming into its 39th year. It is a program developed to give youth an opportunity to learn some skills and to get into volunteer positions within the city. My children went through the program, as probably many children.
Actually, we have our fire chief actually went through the program.
Year two.
Year two. Not to age her, but she's a product of the LEAP program.
It's a youth development program, and we've seen some amazing youth come through that program, and I think all of the managers here have, in one way or another, have worked with those youth. It's very rewarding, and the program is actually recognized on people's resumes when they apply for jobs, that's a nice thing to hear.
Thank you.
I was going to say that Councillor Brown is looking through the pickleball schedule for the benefit of your worship, no doubt. I thought so. Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. Could you tell me approximately how much they went up in 2015?
You'll see right on the bylaw in front of you, it will show the percentages should be there for each one.
32%?
For example,
Okay.
if you look, I'm not sure the page numbers on mine, I don't have necessarily the page numbers, but the, you'd have to take something particular, because the bylaw shows the incremental changes.
Okay.
So I'm just trying to figure if we can find one for sports fields, for example, we want youth under 18.
Oh, I see them.
Yeah, so it went from $8.50 an hour, that's adult commercial. Yeah, I need your glasses.
So I'm looking
So
at
a
the
practice
ISD.
wing game from $2 for an hour for play softball, from $2 an hour to $2.25 an hour.
Thank you.
And that was between 214 and 250, so that was the last one. So that's a C grade field, or $3 for a B grade field, and $6 for an A grade field, so. And then you go through those are the percentages. And I think on our pool drop-in, they went by actual percentages. So, Your Worship, if, I know we have a little bit more time, and again, this is this side, if there's any direction that council at this time wanted to give staff, and we heard definitely you want us to come back with a separate report on LEAP, so we'll definitely do that as an update on that program. But if there's any other direction or comments you want to give us in developing the draft report and bylaw coming back, staff would appreciate anything.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Looking over the increase in fees for the, say, any one of these ones, I'm looking at the adult commercial on the ball fields, went from 32 to 34. If I were to look at just the increase in the cost of inflation, it would have gone up to $32.80. So we're well above the cost of inflation on some of these rises. But my question, maybe this is just for council to consider, with the revenue of $6.2 million, as you outlined in your one of the other slides, if we were to not increase revenue costs on anything right across the board, it would cost us roughly $155,000 a year to augment the increases to inflation on those things. So it's something we would be looking at a 1.15% increase on our taxes each year and just keeping rates on everything low. I'm not suggesting that we do that. I think some of these things we should, or even cancel fees. Some of the things like the dance classes for folks like me, I don't have a problem with those increasing as they see fit. But I just think some of these things that we're encouraging, like youth in our ball fields, we should possibly philosophically looking at not charging, or charging a very minimal one, because I agree with you, giving somebody something for free, they don't particularly appreciate it, and then they don't use it well. So I would think some sort of fee might be there, but just a nominal one. Anyway, that's some conversation for when we look at it later, is when we're looking at this, could we look at long-term, what would be the impact on our budget by not increasing fees on many of these youth-related type of activities? My other question is, have you ever considered, and this isn't so much to do with this bylaw, but considered the addition of childcare into our park system so that we can encourage more young families to come and participate, and so that they know that they can put their kids in daycare while they're there? Has that ever been looked at from Parks?
Your Worship, through the Council Bonner, we have had drop-in. We've removed it from some of our facilities just because of not a lot of use. What we're trying to find ways to, and then Ms. Williams can comment, or actually Darcy Osborne could also comment, trying to find different ways of providing some like programs at the same time. So do a youth program for that age group, then the parents could actually go and go for a swim or a workout. So we're trying to find some different ways of doing those kinds of things versus the child-minding standalone facilities. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, I through the chair to Councillor Bonner, we ran a childcare program for quite a while at Nanaimo Aquatic Centre and Oliver Woods. It was not well subscribed, so we phased it out. Mm-hmm. I would say, though, what we're trying to do is bring in programs that are like one where a parent can participate and have a program a child goes into rather than just a child minding.
Okay, thanks.
And Your Worship, again, when we increased it actually included adults years ago in the LEAP program, was that very fact that we have the children were in the swimming pool in the LEAP, and the perception of the parents were out because they couldn't afford to go in. So again, the initial goal of applying LEAP to the adults was that the parents or caregivers would be with the children. But Your Worship, those are the exact kind of comments we'd like to hear, because we can come back with a report that provides a variety of those types of options for council. As you see, the bylaw is broken up into a number of different uses and users, and our report back to you will also show those breakdowns.
Before I go to Councillor Turley, I'm tempted to respond and remind myself that when our children were young, frankly, we were too busy chasing after them to require or have time for any athletic activity, and I was in better shape than chasing them. Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Having a few years on you, I'm not going to comment on that. So one of the misconceptions I see with regard to pricing of the facilities is everything seems they want to key it to inflation. But we got to realize that there's more to cost increases than just inflation. And I look at your list of the things that you consider. One is current operating costs, which may or may not be more or less than inflation. And also the funding life cycle replacement of associated equipment, which likely is more than inflation. So I get a little concerned when people start saying, well, inflation was only 2% or whatever it is, therefore taxes or costs should only 2%, because that is really just a red herring, in my opinion. And I don't know if you can confirm that costs go up more than the inflation with regard to all aspects of running parks and recreation.
Your Worship, through Councillor Turley, it would depend on the facilities and the activity with it, but definitely some of our capital costs for the Aquatic Centre, for example, are quite substantial. Arenas to another similar degree. The introduction of artificial turf fields to our inventory in the last number of years has helped out in a number of areas, and particularly the ability of how many hours of use we can get on those fields versus some of our other fields. So we've actually pulled a couple of our C-grade fields off of the system, and let's just as helping you or not, which then we can take some of those maintenance and put them in some other places. So it's a variety of aspects, but in general, it is expensive, particularly to run an aquatic environment is very expensive, and there's lots of increases in energy, and particularly energy and other maintenance aspects.
Anyone else?
It's not working.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. And the reason I was, with all due respect to my gentleman here on the right here, reason I was raising that is I do understand that the municipalities have a different kind of pricing index, as Ms. Fuller outlined us, the municipal cost index, which we used to get and don't now. Mostly my concern was the people who use the facilities, their income doesn't increase necessarily in rates of what these are. So it makes a much bigger difference to the people who are only getting the cost of inflation on their wages added on. Thank you.
Yep.
I'm going to throw something shocking out for consideration by council. And what we're discussing today, I think, points up one of the difficulties that we face with this particular level of government. So the super senior who has a pensionable income of $100,000 a year and lives in a nice clear title home on Stevenson Point Road and winters down south on occasion, comes in for free. And the struggling mother with 2 kids living, in a basement suite near the university, she gets it free if she's lucky, but if she's above $43,000 a year, roughly speaking, she's not going to get a break on a pass. The taxes that we collect are based on the value of an asset. You may have $1 million house in Stevenson Point Road, but maybe owe $900,000 to the bank because you've got a chronic gambling problem, your income's not very high a year. And so this points out all of the difficulties around this, and I'm not encouraging this discussion, but I think for the benefit of the public, that they need to understand this is one of the problems we face. We know, according to statistics, that seniors' poverty is increasing in this country again, when in fact it had been on a strong downhill slide for several decades. We know that we have a city that historically has a strong core of poverty, which hasn't changed substantially. We certainly have a housing crisis in this community with 600 to 800 homeless, most of whom, if I accept what I'm told, are residents of Nanaimo. They didn't drop here from Alberta or Saskatchewan or Ontario yesterday or last week or even last year. And so it behooves us, I think, to consider whether we wish to have any class of citizen based on age. Is that a more important benefit than considering poverty and participation of youth and families? It's a nasty, tough political question, but the reason I throw it out is because, candidly, we're coming to a motion tonight that I think is going to reflect some divisions around philosophy and views of council. And I think if we're going to tackle some tough issues, this is one where we actually have programs in place, where we actually deliver the services, and we are the level of government that delivers those services. And I think we need to ask those bigger questions rather than some other questions, perhaps. Is it appropriate? We know that there are seniors who are poor who are taking advantage of these programs and should, and we want them to. We are an increasingly obese and unhealthy society. We're told that great numbers of us are going to live a great deal longer, but in poorer health. I just suggest that, and I'm not asking for a staff report, and if anyone wishes to comment, I'd be delighted, because we do have a few minutes before we get to a section of the agenda, which is, I suspect, not going to be that long, Ms. Mercer. And so if anyone wishes to comment, I'd be interested in hearing their remarks. Councillor Armstrong.
It's something that I too always struggle with, like when we look at that we want to provide, busing for free for, youth, whatever, and I think no. Like for me, I want to do it based on income. There's a lot of seniors, there's a lot of families that can't afford to do it. There's a lot of youth whose parents are multimillionaires, so we're going to give them free stuff. So I really think we should be looking at incomes more than we look at ages if we want to be more fair. Like for me, I'm fortunate, I have great pensions and stuff, but not everybody has that. And so for me, once I hit that age, like you said, once I hit 80, luckily, I don't need a free service because I have very good pensions. I don't have a mortgage. It makes a big difference. And then we do have seniors that may be living in $1 million homes that when they bought them were $100,000, but they don't even have the income to pay for their property taxes. Contrary to popular belief, they don't know how to do it, so they keep deferring it, and they don't understand that they should leave it and downsize, but a lot of them don't want to. So I struggle with exactly what you're saying. I think when we base things based on age, I don't think that's necessarily a direct reflection of what our society is. Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Worship. Just quickly, I welcome all conversations that reduce barriers around access and inclusion to our programs, services, and also our governance.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I'm not disagreeing with some of the excellent comments that have been made, but I have to repeat what I think I stated a little while back, and that is the bottom line is somebody's got to pay for it. And we can give all the breaks we want to any segment of society. We can give it to everybody, and then it's totally taxpayer funded. And I'm not sure we want to go there either. So that's the balancing act.
And that's the discussion Mr. Harding was encouraging us to have here today, is to decide what is the philosophy behind this so that staff can be guided accordingly. I'm going to go to Ms. Gurry. Mr. Rudolph wants to say something. Who wishes to defer to who?
Mr. Rudolph can go ahead.
Going to weigh in on the philosophical conversation, Your Worship, because we're kind of in an unstructured manner here today, and we're going to have to come back and give you, in a GPC, but a finance and audit kind of workshop environment where you can unpack this and sort through this philosophical issue of user pay versus taxation, and what's the sweet spot, and the other piece is what's fair. For targeting certain types of user groups and that type of thing. I know I was in minor hockey for years, and it was a heavy effort on the Minor Hockey Association to subsidize players to make sure anybody that wanted to get into hockey got the equipment, got into the system, and I know they worked with the Parks and Rec department there. So it's not just the field users, in maybe somebody's not athletic and they want to get into the arts program or something that's not. So where's the fairness? And so there's presumably going to be some concerns expressed by some user groups and that type of thing about anything, that even having this conversation. But at the end of the day, it's where's the philosophical position of council, what is fair, and how do you account for the ever-increasing costs that accumulate over the course of time, because they're real. So essentially, you're decreasing the user pay side of it by not increasing the rates. somehow. So we need to give you an environment where you can see this in more clarity. This is just getting it on the table today and see what your direction is, and that would lead to a bylaw which could be implemented later next year, which would have some financial implications for your budget. So it is tied in, I think, to your budget deliberations.
Ms. Gurry, and then I'll go to Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was just going to suggest that as we are a little bit ahead of schedule, once you're done having this conversation, that we recess until KPMG has arrived, because I think they were planning to be here around 3:30, but I think they're on their way now. So they shouldn't be
Thank you.
that long.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, while I've got the opportunity, I just wanted to throw out one other thought, and that is, has it ever been considered to look at the cost of facility replacement and enhancement and have that partially funded over the years through user rates? And I guess I'm thinking of Mr. Sims' department, where we have an infrastructure fund to look at our long-term needs. And I have a real concern that in a number of years, we have aging facilities which are going to reach end of life. And so I'm just asking, has it ever been considered to start to set aside money through user rates to pay for those replacements?
Your Worship, to Councillor Thorpe, so we have the Facility Development Reserve, and 20% of a variety of fees that are charged to users go into that reserve. So that reserve generates a little over $1 million a year. It initially was only to go to capital for new. A number of years ago, given what we found was some of the aging issues of our main facilities, we came back to council and changed the Facility Development Reserve. So a good percentage of that would go to operating projects and renewal projects for facilities. So one of the reasons, again, that when we're coming back for some of our projects and our capital projects to council, close to $1 million a year is already being paid through that reserve to offset those operating accounts. Now, it doesn't go for total rebuild or renewal, because again, we just found that that's not working that way. That's just for our main facilities that pay into the facility reserve. We just did, with our partnership, for another example of that, our partnership with the school district for the NDSS community field, each organization is putting funds away, $25,000 each a year for renewal for that facility. But as we continue to move along our asset management plan for facilities, some of those will come back. So again, there's only certain facilities that pay into that fee right now, and those are the Aquatic Center, the Ice Center, Bevan facilities, Oliver Woods, Bowen Park. And some of our outlying facilities pay into that.
Thank you. I'm glad that's being taken into account, and that's information I should have known, but I didn't. So I'm pleased to hear it. Thank you.
We haven't brought it up we haven't brought a new updated report to council on that. Although, again, it's part of so if fees go up, for example, on our fees and charges, that 20% also goes up to go into the Facility Development Reserve.
Right.
And just mentioning with Mr. Rudolph is, again, the idea today was to introduce this aspect to you. Again, the commission used to spend a year on this, but we wanted to reintroduce it to you because we do have to get something moving on it. And so we'll take the information we have today and come back, as Mr. Rudolph said, to either GPC or Finance and Audit with some drafts and with different options for council to look at.
Anything further? Ms. Gurry, KPMG has arrived. Shall we just proceed, or? And we'll be speaking to them later in any event, but we can't start that meeting until 4 o'clock, I'm assuming.
That's correct, Your Worship. So you're either going to have a break now or a break later.
Well, a few minutes? Let's take 15 then, and back at 10 after, please, no later. KPMG is stuck here with us anyway.
There will be a new decorum statement read out at the start of each meeting to ensure proper decorum is taking place and to assist the chair in his duties. So the proper rules of order and the decorum will be as follows. There will be only one speaker at a time that will have the floor as directed by the chair of the meeting. There will be no interruptions or call-out comments while another person has the floor. Anyone speaking out without having been acknowledged by the chair will be found out of order. If that person does not refrain from speaking without having been acknowledged by the chair, then he or she will be required to leave. For the members of the public speaking, the comments need to be respectful and constructive. Discriminatory or defamatory comments or comments that are in the nature of harassment will not be tolerated, and anyone engaging in such communications will be found out of order. Some examples of behavior that won't be tolerated at a council meeting are as follows. 1. Harassment. In terms of comments about city employees, employees of the City of Nanaimo have a right not to be subjected to discriminatory or defamatory comments or personal attacks against their competency or character. All speakers must refrain from such comments about identifiable staff. Comments should be limited to issues regarding the city's policies or operations. Number 2. Section 7 of the Human Rights Code prohibits a discriminatory publication because of race, color, ancestry, place of origin, religion, marital status, family status, physical or mental disability, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or age. Discriminatory comments will not be tolerated. Number 3, defamation is publication about a person that tends to hurt that person's reputation. Defamatory comments will not be tolerated. Please stick to known facts and keep the dialogue respectful and constructive.
Are you tired of dragging the garbage out? They just don't make them like they used to. It's a saying that doesn't really apply to garbage cans. Yes, young man, you seem ready for a new garbage and recycling experience. Take a look at the new green, blue, and black carts right behind you. Yes, exactly. Oh, I see your confusion. I can fix it. Go ahead, give them a try. Pretty easy to roll, right? Did you know that a set of these carts will be delivered to every house in Nanaimo as a part of the new Sort, Toss, Roll program? It's designed to make it easy for you to sort your waste, toss it into the correct cart, and roll it to the curb.
3 carts will be assigned to your home, but the city actually owns them. This way, the city will maintain responsibility for repairing and replacing the carts when it's needed.
Wow, you really are happy about this. There are a few things you need to know before you start wheeling your carts to the curb. Are you ready? Great, let's get ready to sort, toss, roll.
Yeah!
Did you think that this was a silent video? Well, now that you've found your voice, why don't you narrate this next bit?
The new Sort, Toss, Roll automated curbside collection program is coming to Nanaimo in 2 phases. Phase 1 is being rolled out to central Nanaimo now. Sort, Toss, Roll will come to the rest of Nanaimo in the summer of 2018. Carts will be delivered and placed at the end of your driveway, yard, or curbside. This is how you should place your carts on collection days. An information package will be left for you, further introducing you to the new program. with information spanning from instructions on how to place your cart on different types of streets to options for cart upsizing, or details on what goes into each cart.
Wow, you really know your stuff. Tell me, why are there 3 colors of carts?
Well, this one is for organics, this one is for garbage, and this blue one over here is for any recyclables.
Very good. Now, what goes into the blue recycling cart?
Cardboard, plastic containers, milk jugs, cans, or anything that used to go into the yellow recycling bags.
Now, David, what goes into the green cart?
The green cart is for your organics, any compostable food, pizza boxes, or napkins. Anything that used to go into the old organics bin.
And
what?
I'll give you a hint.
Yard clippings.
Yes, the new green cart has plenty of room for grass and weeds. Now, what about the black cart?
Easy. That one is for garbage. Any waste that can't be composted or recycled. But what if the carts aren't big enough?
Well, the city of Nanaimo has an exchange program in place. Homes that have more demand for recycling and household waste can upsize their carts. That reminds me, anyone that has questions about the Sort Toss Roll program can call the hotline or visit our webpage.
The standard 240-litre blue recycling cart can hold 3 times the amount of recyclables as your yellow bag, and it won't blow away in the wind. The 120-litre green cart can hold 3 times as much as your old green bin, and the 120-litre black bin is about the size of 1.5 garbage bags. And now, you won't even need to buy those black garbage bags.
Are you going to get that?
I probably should. Take over for a bit, will you?
Okay.
Excellent. Thanks.
Hang on. Let's try this. Sort Toss Roll is a new way of doing away with waste. New trucks are a big part of the program and come equipped with an automated arm to lift, dump, and replace the carts on collection day. The trucks are efficient. Each truck has 2 compartments and can pick up both your weekly organics and your recycling or garbage. They are also fueled by compressed natural gas, so they are green too. And the trucks are safe. Our waste collectors no longer need to lift the cans manually. This means far less injuries on the job and happier workers. The new trucks are awesome. The arms can reach out up to 10 feet to pick up the carts. It is important you place them properly on collection day though, to make sure that your waste and recycling can be picked up. How you place your carts depends largely on the type of street your home is on. If your street looks like this, with a sidewalk divided and set in from the curb, place your carts like this. If your street looks like this, with a sidewalk and a curb as one, place your carts like this. If your street doesn't have a sidewalk or curb, place your carts like this at the end of your driveway. And finally, if you have a curbed sidewalk but can't place your carts behind the sidewalk because of a wall, ditch, or fence, place your carts like this in front of the curb. Always remember to place your carts 1 meter apart to allow room for the automated arm, and point the arrow on your cart legs towards the street. In the occasional neighborhood, there are other factors that may affect how you can place your carts, such as street parking or steep hills. The City of Nanaimo will find a collection solution for every situation. It may not look like it, but there's technology in the carts. Each cart has a digital ID tag, which tells the truck which house it belongs to and whether it's the recycling, organics, or waste cart, so that it gets dumped to the right compartment at pickup.
Contamination happens when things that can't get recycled get tossed into the blue cart. Styrofoam, plastic bags and glass can't be accepted at the curb. The automated sorting machine at the recycling facility cannot process them. This means contaminated loads of recycling end up being sent to landfill. So do your part and recycle smart.
Sort Toss Roll. It's easy, efficient, green, clean, and safe.
I was going to say that.
Go ahead then.
It's easy, efficient, green, clean, and safe.
That about sums it up.
David, time for dinner.
Don't worry, we've covered a lot today, and if people want to learn more about Sort Toss Roll,
call the hotline, 250-756-5390.
Come on, David.
I've got to go.
What was that number again?
250-756-5390.
I'd like to call the meeting back to order, everyone, please. The next item is the KPMG Audit Planning Report, and Ms. Mercer, you're going to introduce our guests, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. So each year, the city is required to have an audit of their financial statements. And our current auditors, KPMG, come into our offices twice a year to do the audit. They come in once in the fall to do an interim audit, and then they come back in the spring to complete all the audit work. And present the audit results to council. So before they start their audit, they like to come before you all and tell you what their plan is for the year and any upcoming new standards that are coming out, and an opportunity for you to ask questions as well. So today, you will find in your agenda package the 2019 Audit Planning Report, and Ms. Liette Bates-Emer and Sarah Burden are here to walk you through that report.
Thank you very much. Come up to the mic and enjoy the spotlight.
Is there a clicker for my thing, or should I just signal?
It's not the best setup, so don't stand away from the mic.
What's that?
I was going to say it's not the best setup, so don't stand away from the mic.
Okay.
The closer into the podium, the better, please.
Okay.
Especially for us deaf old guys.
Can you hear me now? Yeah? Okay, so we've issued a audit plan to the Finance and Audit Committee. This document here, what I would like to just do is present the highlights of what we have given to you in our plan, which we have in this presentation here. The audit team that we have for the work this year will be led by myself, Liette, as the lead engagement partner. I'm supported by our engagement quality review partner, Nancy Ady Mackay, and then the senior manager on the file that will oversee all of the field work, review the field work, is Sarah Burden, who's with me today. I can confirm that all of our team members of our audit, the leaders as well as our staff, are independent of the city. The fees that we will charge this year are consistent with our proposal. So we had a RFP that had 3 years worth of fees in it, with a 2-year extension option, which we have agreed on fees for the next 2 years going forward. So this is year sort of 4 of 5. So our materiality that we plan to use in our audit of the financial statements this year is 3.7 million. Materiality represents the maximum level of error that could be in the financial statements before we would have to qualify our audit opinion. That number is sort of a judgment of what might change a user's decision if that error were in the statements. We follow auditing standards for establishing that number. So in a nonprofit environment, such as the city, we use a gross benchmark in line with the auditing guidance to drive our materiality figure. So that benchmark we've used this year is total expenses, consistent with the prior year. The 3.7 million is at about 2.3% of the total expenses. So the auditing rules say we could be between 0.5 and 3% of that benchmark, and we're at about 2.3. So that being said, we do also report back to the Finance and Audit Committee any errors that we find throughout our audit testing greater than 185,000. So anything above that needs to come back in our summary of findings that we will present in likely late April this year. In our report, there is only one significant risk that we have identified, and that risk is required to be identified as significant in accordance with professional standards. So that's the risk of fraud due to management override. So I could say that there is nothing specific to the city this year that is concerning us in this area, but that is a requirement that we identify that as a risk and then appropriately address it. So to address this risk, we are looking at journal entries, any unusual journal entries, manual journal entries. We're taking a retrospective review of estimates. So estimates is the area where you could, that's the only place where you could sort of manipulate your numbers, manipulate your numbers 100%, because estimates are guesses, right? And then also looking at any significant unusual transactions in more detail. For this year, we're not really expecting any significant unusual transactions, except maybe your land swap, which is not anticipated to be super material anyways. We're required at this stage of our audit to inquire of the Finance and Audit Committee regarding fraud and whether there is anything that you wish to bring to our attention as we are planning for our audit. So I'll maybe just pose the question if you have anything to bring to our attention now. All good? Okay. So in terms of our approach to the audit, we take a look at sort of the significant accounts and transactions and perform various procedures over them. On this slide here, we've just given you sort of a sample of the types of audit procedures that we take to the more significant areas in the financial statements. So for tangible capital assets, we are agreeing additions that are being put on your books to the actual invoices that you're paying vendors for those capital projects. Salaries and benefits, so in your salaries and benefits, you do have a large liability for employee future benefits. So we're looking at any kind of assumptions used in coming up with a calculation that estimates that liability. Cash and investments, we can confirm 100% with third parties what you've got on your books. Revenues and receivables, a lot of this is analytical work, so looking at what your budget was, what your numbers were last year, and comparing and looking at any kind of variances. For expenses and payables, the risk here would be that there could be something that has not been recorded, so we go through payments made after year-end to ensure that anything paid after year-end that relates to December 31st year-end have been captured in your accounts. In our report, we have details of upcoming public sector accounting standards changes. The next one that would be most relevant to the city would be the standards for asset retirement obligations, which will be applicable for your year ended December 31st, 2022. This standard is sort of covering off what was not covered by the contaminated sites a couple of years ago. So all assets are in scope, and assets that have a legal obligation that will come about on retirement, that obligation will need to be estimated at the time of adoption and then accrued for. So we'll work with management over the next few years on the process to appropriately adopt the asset retirement obligation standard. That's it.
Questions, anyone? Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Ms. My mind goes blank at the worst time, Liat. The question I have is on page 74 of the document, we received current developments under public-private partnerships, P3s.
Yeah.
And my question is, we're embarking on a procedure to form a hybrid-type economic development function, and part of it, nothing really has, we're having our first meeting of the task force next Monday, but it kind of tweaked my interest as whether this would be included or depending on how we develop it as in kind of a private-public partnership. I guess I don't understand the full parameters of it.
Yeah. So I think in this, when the standard is developed, that what's out there now is just an exposure draft. So they kind of put out ideas that they're thinking of adopting in an exposure draft and then receive comments, and from there, a standard is established. So I am not really brushed up on this particular standard, but typically what would be in there is a definition. So you would look to the definitions first to see if you meet the definition of a P3 that they're providing the guidance on. So your particular project, you'd probably have to look at if it's going to be following this here, once they establish the definitions. So there is sort of accounting treatment out there for P3, actual P3 projects like the ones on the Partnerships BC website and whatnot, right?
Okay.
This seems to, if you're not doing it through Partnerships BCs, this might be slightly different, right?
Yeah, it's a city initiative, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Bonner.
I think Mr.
Oh,
Rudolph.
Mr. Rudolph, sorry.
Your Worship, obviously, when the economic development entity gets established, there'll be a partnership arrangement. I'm not sure if it fits in the traditional definition of a P3, which is often capital projects. This is an operating agreement that we'll have some partnership agreement with. So we have a lot of those arrangements. So I wouldn't necessarily think it falls under the category of P3, but it is definitely a public-private partnership of sorts. So we'll just, we won't know what that looks like until this committee is struck and does its due diligence, and makes recommendations and gets implemented. So it could be a fee-for-service agreement, could be all sorts of different things. I just wanted to mention that. So P3 is a possibility, but it's unlikely that that's the term we'll end up using to describe it. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. And question, if I may, you mentioned 185K as a requirement there. Is that a per item, or is that per department, or per transaction schedule? How does that work, that part of it?
Yeah, so probably more like per transaction, because throughout our testing procedures, so say we are looking at an invoice that has a difference from what was recorded to what was on the physical invoice. If that is greater than 185, then we would propose that difference. So errors usually come about through our testing of individual items, right? So if we test an item and it's wrong by less than 185, that individual item wouldn't make it onto our list. However, we don't, we will ensure that there aren't other items of a similar nature in that population that could aggregate to greater than 185. Does that make sense?
Yep, no, that's exactly what I was looking for. Thank you. Okay. I read your information on asset retirement, which could have very well been Chinese, as far as I'm concerned. I couldn't understand any of it. But what I'm looking for is, how will that affect our budgets going forward? Will it affect our costing for projects? Are we going to be using up all our surplus and just disappearing through an accounting transaction? What does it mean in terms of our budgeting for large projects?
Yeah, so usually, or nowadays, probably the cost of dismantling or taking down something prior to building your new building or whatever is all included in your project cost, right? Mm-hmm. What this standard is going to say is that where there is an element of that project cost on the decommissioning or destruction of what was there previously, that the legal obligation in that, so I'm going to use asbestos as an example because that's kind of the biggest thing that this section is going to cover. That legal requirement to remediate the asbestos when you take down the building, the standard is making you book that now, so or upon adoption. So you will have effectively, you gross up, I'm going to get into accounting now, but if you're going to have to gross up your asset value and book an obligation. So that obligation is on your books, and what it represents is the future cost of the asbestos remediation when you do the project. So when you go to do that project, effectively, you've already expensed that component that relates to asbestos, right? And it's gonna come through your expenses kind of over time by way of amortizing the asset that you put on. And then an accounting term that I know is gonna be a word you don't like, called accretion, that creeps up the liability, so that on the day that you do the demo, if you've done it right, the obligation will equal that cash flow for the asbestos. So it's really weird because you're going to have a piece of the project that you've already expensed, and all the rest of it is going to be, you're going to need your capital funding 20 years from now to do the rest of the project. So it's sort of awkward for funding planning, I would say, because this little piece of the project, well, depending on what this will cost in the future, is going to have already gone through.
So in essence, will we have to, if we're projecting like something like this and we start the planning of the project, are we going to have to put some money in the bank to get rid of the asbestos ahead of time?
Your cash outflow, yeah, is going to happen on that day, right?
When you first started or when you demo the building?
Yeah, the cash flow will happen when you're demoing the building and doing it, but the expense for it is already going to have run through your books.
Okay, thanks. Maybe something a little more like my thing. What would an example of a manual entry in a journal be for a city our size? You mentioned manual entries.
There's not a lot of people that have gone through this fully and gone through their assets. Like, I do know of a few health authorities that have done it. Obviously, the health authorities would have a lot of hospitals or buildings with asbestos, right? And so I think what I had heard was there was 3 different health authorities, one in the Lower Mainland, probably one in the interior, or maybe a couple in the Lower Mainland. And one of them had sort of immaterial liability, and other ones had pretty significant, maybe a couple times their materiality. So it's really hard to say for cities. I haven't heard of any cities that have gone through the exercise yet. I don't know if maybe management has, to figure out what kind of the magnitude would be for cities.
Yeah, well, and thank you for that. I was just wondering, you mentioned earlier in the presentation about making manual entries and reviewing them. Is that the kind of would be a manual entry in our journal as opposed to be automatically going through invoicing software?
Yeah,
Okay.
that would be you, because you'd have to do all of the work to come up with an estimate and accrue it upon adopting that standard. So, yeah, and then the automated part would probably be that once you've got it going, you're going to have amortization probably taken manually once you've set something up.
Okay. My admiration for accountants just went way up.
They never say that about their lawyers, do they? Anyone else? Thank you very much. That was a relatively easy ride, right?
We're hoping. Okay, thanks.
Any other business? Question period? Suspect there isn't. Didn't see anyone come today. Motion for adjournment? Councillor Bonner, seconded Councillor Brown. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. We'll see you at 4 o'clock at the commencement of the council meeting.